Hello everyone, over these past few devlogs we've made some huge progress making all of the core mechanics for our combat style tea cooking game. We've got our ingredient enemies, different weapon utensils, cooking mechanics, customers, and a cute fluffy companion to help us serve the orders. Fundamentally, this is all we need for the game, but how fun is it? Well, I've spent a lot of time building up the world's art and concept, so naturally the gameplay isn't the most fleshed out thing yet. Keyword yet. But that's all gonna change today. As important as art and making the world beautiful is to me, at the end of the day, gameplay is the most important thing. Because the game's gotta be fun. Like, who's gonna play a boring ass game? Definitely not me, and I wanna have fun too. So I've been doing a lot of playtesting to see what mechanics can be improved and what needs to be added. So let's go through all of the new mechanics and quality of life changes we've made that'll really enhance the player's experience and gameplay. So first, let's start off with the bucket. It's probably one of the most important tools in the game, as it holds the water which is used for the base of our ingredients. But as I kept playing, I started to realize how ineffective it was at completing orders, as it could only fill up one kettle at a time, and to fill up two, it takes 2 trips to the water pumper to fill up both kettles. But by then, the timer of the first one had already gone down quite a lot, leaving less time to prepare ingredients and cook. To cut down on the number of trips, I decided to increase the amount of water that can be held inside the bucket from 1 to 4 water charges. And instead of instantly filling the bucket, the player now has to hold Z in front of the water bowl to charge up the water. We have this bar indicator to show how long it takes to fill up each charge. There's also a bucket in the HUD to show how much water the player has at all times. It was vital that we improve this core mechanic, as you would have to run through this step multiple times in each level, as using water is the fundamental way to cook. The more the player does it, the faster they'll get tired of doing it. So this fixes that repetitive motion from happening too frequently, and even though the process to fill up the water is slightly longer, we rewarded the player for that extra effort, making the trade-offs much more worth it, and ultimately saving the player from running marathons across the kitchen. While playing, I also found myself constantly losing the bucket after placing it down. And yes, my short-term memory may have played a part in this, but it happened enough to where I was like, okay, this is a little bit absurd and there's gotta be a better way to do this. Like, I'm not even gonna lie, there were some times where I was so focused on completing orders, and after I served them, I would look for the bucket to make my next order, and I would think it would be somewhere, but then I would go there and it's not. Since we use different tools to cook and they're on Faye at all times, I thought, why not do the same thing for the bucket? But I did want to make it a little bit different, since you do have to be holding the bucket to use it. So we made this pocketing system where the bucket can be put away or taken out by pressing C, so now it's accessible at all times. You can't find the bucket, it's just in your pocket. You need to get rid of burnt tea really quickly, just take it out of your pocket. As you may notice, I do really like this addition, and I wanted to take it a step further by being able to pocket at least one held item at a time. Because there was currently this over-reliance on having to use tabletops to cook. Like, this is how it typically looked like to cook. But with the new pocketing mechanic, it sped up the process a lot, and it opened up so many more convenient and different ways to cook. Like collecting tea and discarding burnt tea, collecting dropped ingredients on the spot and stacking them, and immediately cooking with dropped ingredients. It really cuts down on the number of steps required for cooking. However, there were some times where the bucket would actually get in the way of grabbing an item. So instead of pocketing it before grabbing the item, I wanted it to happen automatically. So now in any case that you're holding the bucket and you're interacting with something that will require the player to hold an item, it simply just swaps it. These are small quality of life changes that can sometimes go unnoticed, but really shapes the player's experience by making everything more streamlined and smooth, so they don't have to sweat the small stuff and focus on other things. After making those quality of life changes, it's now a lot easier to make 2 teas at once. We can also fill up kettles faster, and they usually finish cooking at similar times. And with the window getting a gold star being quite small, it can also be hard to get the timing right to get 2 gold orders. So we increased the amount of teapots Faye can hold to 4, allowing him to collect more orders with the teapots he's holding. You, however, won't be able to pocket multiple teas, because Faye's pockets aren't that deep. If you're holding a stack, the teapot closest to Faye will be the one to collect tea. Also, have you guys noticed something a bit different about Faye? He's wearing a new hat. Do you guys like it? It's actually chosen by one of you guys. Since this video is centered about making the game more fun, I thought it'd be fun to ask my supporters over on Patreon what hats they like to see Faye wear, and do like a little collaboration thing. So the cat hood and crown actually tied for first. and I'm planning to do more events like this in the future, and anyone can join these events and polls. So if you guys want to be a part of the next one, I'll link my Patreon down in the description below. One of the biggest things that can help really improve a game is movement, and right now walking is the only available way to get around. And in this time pressure game, it is not going to be easy to complete levels. So I first added running, which makes it a lot easier to collect recipes in time and dodge enemy attacks, but sometimes I do find myself being overwhelmed by the enemies and I need a more instant get out of trouble method too. So I wanted to make a dodge for the player, and there are a lot of different types of dodges you can make in games. And my first thought was to make a classic roll dodge. But like, why would he need to do all of that inside of a kitchen? Is that a little too extra? But then I thought about how if Faye was holding a bunch of teapots, he could throw them all in the air, do a roll, and time it perfectly to where he catches all of them on his head without spilling a single drop. And that's pretty badass. And yeah, that was when I knew it was the one. I wanted the roll to be very accessible so you can use it from both walking and holding states. So I made 3 different versions. One for the standard roll, where I threw his hand up to prepare for the roll, and I pulled his arms in so he could turn into a ball and closes his eyes to brace himself through the roll. I made another one for his holding state where he puts the item away and does his roll. By putting it away, I mean it just vanishes, because it just needs to show that the player can do a roll now that the item is put away. And the roll is such a huge burst of motion, it doesn't look too abrupt when the item just disappears. For the recovery frames, it slows down a lot, so instead of having it reappear at the end, I have it appear when Faye's arms are free to hold the item again. And for the multiple teapot roll, I made all of the teapots launch up relatively slowly as they are quite heavy, and I had them suspend in the air for about 2 to 3 frames before dropping down very quickly because of gravity. And when it comes into contact with his head, I wanted to highlight that he caught it, so I added a frame where it pushes him down before he gets back up, and this just helps highlight the impact of him catching the tea. Both the standard and item roll have the same amount of frames and they play very smoothly with the player's walk and run cycle. But for the teapot roll, it had 2 more frames than the other rolls, and with more recovery frames, there is more ending lag. Having the roll be longer made it more realistic, which was good, because it's throwing a bunch of heavy teapots in the sky and catching them all at once, and that definitely will slow him down. But it did feel a bit too clunky for me as the player pauses for longer, and it gives me the same feeling I get when I play City Escape, where I'm on a roll having the time of my life and I bump into an object somewhere and it just kills the vibe. So I took out one of the frames, and now it is only 1 more frame than the idle and hold roll, and it just feels so much better to play. So I think with 1 extra frame, it helps strike that balance of it not being too slow and not too fast. These rolls provide the player with invincibility for the majority of the animation, and it's a really quick tool to dodge projectiles and enemy attacks. It does have a cooldown time of about 1 second, so the player can't just spam it and stay invincible the whole time, as that would be pretty OP. It's slower than the walk and run, so it's not going to be able to replace them as a main form of transportation. In the animation, the roll frames are invincible, however the startup and recovery frames aren't, so you still are susceptible to getting hit in those, so you just gotta make sure you time the rolls correctly. One of the things that I always knew I wanted to expand on was the combat system. The sword has always felt a bit limited to me, like it gets the job done but it feels very static, so I wanted to think of a way to make the sword a bit more interactive, and I thought a Rekka system could really help improve the sword. A Rekka system basically allows you to do sequential attacks after one another like a combo. If you ever played Super Smash Bros, it would be similar to Marth's Dancing Blade. Last time when I made the sword slash animation, it was my first time making a sword, and after making it I realized that I still had a lot to learn before I could make a proper sword slash. I kind of went into it blindly, not knowing what to expect, but I wanted to improve it a lot more this time. And up until this point, I've mostly been teaching myself how to animate using my very limited knowledge on animation, and I've recently got the itch to study again. Who would have thunk that doing something that you're actually interested would make you want to learn more about it? I was definitely not like that in uni. So I found some helpful resources made by pixel artists, and some had full-blown websites with tutorials, and some were just GIF tutorials I found on Google. I really like the GIF tutorials because they condense all this information onto one image. I even found out Masahiro Sakurai had his own tutorials on YouTube, who was the creator of Super Smash Bros., which blew my mind. I'll put them in my description for any of you guys who want to get better at pixel art as well. So in my previous sword slash animation, I had a lot of frames showing the actual motion of the sword effect, and it gave off a pretty slow looking slash. You only really need to have one main frame to show the sword effect. So to make the sword attack, I broke it into 4 main phases: anticipation, attack, follow through, and recovery. This sword is actually very light, and I wanted to limit the amount of frames for each phase to keep it fast. And after playing around with the number of frames, I settled on having 1 frame for each phase, and the follow through is the only one that has 2, so the animation's pretty quick, which gave the sword a nice swift motion. For the attack, I had a large piece of the sword effect show to highlight the hitbox, and to have the effect fade away a bit more naturally, I left the ends of the trail on the next follow through frame. So I went from 6 frames with the sword effect to only 2. And now the slash feels a lot more faster and natural. So that was all good for 1 slash, but to make a Rekka I needed to make 3 more slashes after this that all linked together well. And coming up with the idea of 4 slashes that all linked together was a tall order for me. And it's kind of hard to find references for all of that, so I thought, why don't I be the reference? So I just recorded myself doing some choreographed air slashing. I went through the footage and paused what keyframes I felt like would be most important for my sword slashes. And I did feel hella goofy doing this, but it's the best way to get some variety of poses down. So after a sword swing, there are 2 possible outcomes that it can lead into. One where the player just goes idle and pauses after doing 1 slash, and another where the player goes from 1 slash to another slash. The animations all have to link together in a way. So with this in mind, I had the recovery frame naturally lead into the idle. Sometimes the player can go into the idle state and then follow up with a second Rekka. So there is some breathing room to fulfill a whole Rekka. Since the first frame of each Rekka attack is similar to the recovery frame, all the Rekkas blend into each other smoothly. In the Rekka animation, I had Faye take some steps forward, so when we implemented the motion into Unity, we added a forward velocity for every time Faye stepped forward in the animation. At the start, I didn't have Faye step forward in every slash, but playing that in the game, it felt like I wasn't getting enough feedback for every Rekka slash without that forward movement, so I changed the animation and made it so Faye walked forward for every attack, and that felt a lot smoother and natural to play. For the last attack, I wanted the player to do a large swipe and knock back the enemies, so at the end of every Rekka, the player does a pretty big lunge forward to really emphasize that power. And with that, we also added some slight knockback for every other sword attack. Now the combat system feels so much more alive with the enemy knockback and variety of slash attacks, because it gets pretty stale with the same old sword slash, and the sword is the most used weapon, so I'm really happy to see Faye with so much more movement when attacking. I didn't have Faye walk forward in the first slash because if the player just wants to prepare a projectile ingredient, they can without fully committing to the forward motion of the Rekka. And I think it's nice if you just want to throw out a casual stray sword slash. I had a lot of fun playing with this new upgrade, so I hope you guys really enjoy it too when you get to try it out. Not only is Faye able to use a sword, but he can also use a hammer, and these different weapons help us prepare our ingredients differently. But currently each weapon uses a different key, and with all these new additional options we've made, it's getting a bit crowded on the keyboard, so we have to optimize the usage of weapons. So I wanted the player to be able to switch their weapon with just 1 button and use the X key to utilize it. Throughout this video, you may have noticed a new addition to the bottom right corner, and that is the new weapon wheel. I wanted the player to have access to 3 weapons in total, so I knew I wanted to display those options in the HUD at all times. And Faye wears this clip in his design, which I felt was a nice shape to hold the weapons in. This weapon wheel also belongs to him, so having parts of his design used in the HUD is always a plus. Since the bucket is more of a utility item than a weapon, I wanted it to be more separated from the other tools. And to connect the bucket to the weapon wheel, I added this buckle to the side. For the next one, I added some plants at the back, similar to Faye's plant pattern on his sleeve, and I liked that the bucket could perch on one of the flowers or leaves. But this design had too much going on, and it did blend with the environment a bit too much for my liking. Then I made this simplified version with just the clip having 1 diagonal and 1 vertical, but I started to feel like this clip shape wasn't really working the best for me, so I tried a more traditional traditional HUD using flat shapes to hold the weapons, and it really helps the weapons pop out from the background. And just to keep it a bit more interesting, I added this little ornament behind it. In the end, these two were the final candidates. This one was very minimal and simple. Sometimes simple is good because it's clear, but it really felt like something was missing with this one. It wasn't matching that same energy the other HUD elements had, so it felt a bit lackluster, and I feel like this option matched the UI really well. It was just a little bit unrefined. All of the components in this design weren't fully working together cohesively. So I was showing Rob, our programmer, some of the designs that I came up with, and he thought it would be a good idea if the ornaments went through each node from right to left. So with the idea, I came up with this, and I think that the design flowed a lot better. So I chucked the designs into Sprite and started pixel arting over it. I mixed two different rendering techniques to achieve the style that I wanted to match the dockets. I rendered over the ornament reference and weapon holders precisely with my pixel brush and then thickened it after. And for the weapon icons, instead I pixel arted a small version of them and scaled up the size. This is what the icons would actually look like if I rendered it in the same style as the ornament, and it looks really high definition and not as cute. So I definitely prefer the more low resolution icons. And I actually did a more rendered version for the hearts and the currency at the start, and I might change that in the future so that everything has this low res icon look. When we implemented the weapon wheel into the game, it still looked a bit flat, and I felt like there could be more emphasis on the selected weapon. So we made the secondary weapon smaller and darker, and when the weapon rotates into the selected position, it expands into a larger size and lightens, making it easier to notice, which really helped differentiate it from the other weapons. And even if you slightly glance at the weapon wheel, or even see it in your peripheral vision, it's a lot clearer which weapon is chosen. So to use the weapon wheel, you press A to turn left and S to turn right, and whichever weapon is in the middle, if you press X, it will use the sword because that is the chosen weapon, and if I switch it out to the hammer and press X, it'll allow me to operate the hammer. When you progress through the game, you will unlock more weapons as you go, and the player won't always have 3 weapons to hold, so I made 2 other weapon wheels to hold 1 weapon and 2 weapons. And that's about everything for today's video. We've made some major changes such as improving the quality of life with the pocketing mechanic, new game mechanics like the run, roll, and wrecker system that really enhances the experience by giving more options for players to use, and the weapon wheel that really improved the clarity of the current weapon being used and control optimization. And for the next episode, we'll be expanding on the first region we visit. So we'll be working on new cutscenes to set up for the story and explore what more the region has to offer. And you might even get to experience it firsthand too. But that's all for today's devlog. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'd also like to thank everyone who recently joined my Patreon, and a special thanks to Julian Hink and Mary. I really appreciate you guys, and I'll continue to work as hard as possible to keep giving progress updates and more content. Thank you everyone for watching this video, and if you guys have any questions for Caddy's tea service or just your thoughts on the video, please leave it in the comment and I'd love to hear what you have to say. If you guys like this video, make sure to leave a like. For more content, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell to get the latest updates for everything Caddy's tea service. And that's all for today. See you in the next one. Bye bye!